Destination Africa, brought to you by Standard Bank.
Key is to be able to use those mineral revenues in a way that actually benefits not just this generation but future generations. So it's not just being able to exploit the minerals, but actually managing the resources, that the revenues that they get from the minerals. And the key there is going to be how do you translate those resources into human capital to be able to increase the level of education and health of the population. These are very poor countries that have large numbers of people living on less than $1.25 a day, and we need to increase their human capital so they can lead a better life and a better life for their children.
And that in turn raising the entire debate that's emerged around the importance of beneficiation as well, and developing processes there as a means to broadening the economic base, broadening economic wealth. Is enough stride being made in that regard?
Well, I think beneficiation should be seen as one option of many that countries have to diversify their economies. That it is tempting to say that since you're producing the minerals, then let's process them and bring them out. But if there's a more competitive industry in some other sector, such as textiles or clothing or garments, then perhaps beneficiation doesn't look so good, even if you're a mineral exporter. And again, unfortunately, the track record of previous attempts at beneficiation has not been very good.
Why? What have been the challenges to a multifaceted approach?
Well, the main reason is that governments jumped into beneficiation without looking at the alternatives. And, in many cases, beneficiation is very capital intensive, whereas what the countries had was a lot of labor. And so you had to continually subsidize the capital in order to make beneficiation more and more competitive. And sometimes it got to the point where they couldn't afford to keep subsidizing it. Whereas had they used that limited resources to build a labor-intensive industry like garments or something like that, that may have taken off on its own, as has happened in other countries like Bangladesh and so on.
So that would be the alternative. Having said that, what role does the private sector need to start playing in terms of adding value to raw materials? So instead of, shipping them off in raw form, we have businesses actually adding that value.
Well, I think the private sector should invest in wherever it's most profitable. That's their job, right? That's why they're the private sector. And so if there is profit to be made by investing in beneficiation, by all means they should do it. But if there are greater profits to be made by investing in garments or light electronics or leather or clothing, they should be investing in that. That's what they're good at.
Of course, where profits, attract investors. Let's take a look at some of the incentives that could be offered to investors to put their money on the continent. For example, where high levels of taxation on the continent have been highlighted in the past as a burden, to what extent should we be using our fiscal policies to more effectively draw in investment? Can we?
Well, I think we can use fiscal policy to attract investment, but there's a danger of going too far on the other side. What I'm observing, particularly in a lot of mineral investment contracts, is that governments have thought that they don't have enough bargaining power, and so they have to give lots of concessions. And when they do that, they find that actually they've given up too much. And those companies would have invested anyway had they actually taxed them a little bit more.
And therein lying the danger to offering incentives.
That's right. There is a big danger in that. And I think Zambia is a good example of that. And, Zambia has about 75% of its exports in copper, but the Zambian Revenue Authority gets less than 1% or about 1% of revenue from copper revenues.
With that, we've seen this charging of mining royalties coming to the fore a little bit more aggressively, viewed as a way for countries to reap some of the benefit of their natural wealth resources. Tanzania, Zambia, a case in point. But it's given rise to contentious debate because it's a tightrope that governments walk, needing to balance between the needs and catering to investors and that of local communities. Where do you sit within that debate?
Well, I think there's no strict rule on that, but that's exactly the balance that government should make. And it's a bargain, right? When they have something to sell and the companies have something to buy, then we have to find a place where we can reach an agreement, a zone of agreement between the two parties. But I think what's really important there is to make sure that the African countries have sufficient bargaining power and negotiating capacity to be able to strike a deal that is mutually beneficial.
Bringing in the importance of regional integration. I mean, we've seen the East African Common Market Protocol recently being signed, and that, enhancing East Africa as a region. Are we making enough stride in that regard as singing with one voice, so to speak?
Oh, I think there are limits to how far you can go in singing with one voice in a chorus like Africa. But I think that definitely setting standards, setting common protocols for negotiating contracts does definitely strengthen your bargaining power.